Welcome to Holding Down the Fort, an award-winning podcast show dedicated to curating knowledge, resources, and relevant stories for today's military spouses so they can continue to make confident and informed decisions for themselves and their families. Because let's face it, we know who's really holding down the fort. I'm Jen Amos, a Gold Star daughter, veteran spouse, and your host for Holding Down the Fort by U.S. Vet Wealth. Let's get started. Hey everyone, Jen Amos here. It's just me today. I'm really excited to share this special episode with you. I had the fortune to speak with Tim Brooks on his podcast show, I'll Talk If You Listen. And he was so kind to give me a copy of the raw file of our interview so that I could share it to our listenership here. So Tim, thank you so much for this opportunity to reshare our conversation. I thought this would be a great opportunity for all of you to get to know me a little bit more. I know that I spend a lot of time interviewing other people and really bringing to light the education, knowledge, resources, and relevant stories for our military families today, especially our career military families and our spouses. And there's a reason why I do what I do. And I think that this conversation I had with Tim did a great job capturing that. So first of all, in this conversation, you will hear me talk extensively about my experience living in San Diego for about 20 years before I moved out to Virginia Beach in the recent years. I covered some things about what typically tourists perceive of San Diego and what people should know about San Diego. I do get into my background about being a Gold Star daughter and how that impacted me growing up and how it made me view the military community, at least until I met my husband, in which we work together now in U.S. Vet Wealth, really serving our military community. I share how meeting him and working with him has given me a more positive perspective on our community. So you'll get to hear more about that, like I mentioned in this conversation. I talk about the history of holding down the fort, how it came about, why it came about, and why we're still here today, 4 seasons later. And of course, we'll dive into U.S. Vet Wealth, which is the company that sponsors our show and all that good stuff. So yeah, I'm really excited for you all to listen to this conversation. And once again, I just want to remind you that the show is brought to you by U.S. Vet Wealth. And right now we are giving away the first 3 chapters of our best-selling book, Veteran Wealth Secrets, the post-military playbook for obtaining autonomy and financial control in the modern economy. You can actually download those first 3 chapters today by visiting veteranwealthsecrets.com. All right. Thank you all so much. I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Tim Brooks on his podcast show, I'll Talk If You Listen. Tim, thanks again. And to our listeners, enjoy.
Hey, gang. Welcome back. Another episode, another week. And this time, not just another guest, a very special guest. We have a Gold Star daughter, host of Holding Down the Fort podcast, which is an award-winning podcast, Jen Amos. Jen, how are you?
Tim, it's great to be here. I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
I think my face is going to hurt after I get off the call because I've been smiling so much. I've been looking forward to the interview. And Jen, I guess we can tell everybody, we've been kind of planning this for weeks now. I want to say, about 2-3 weeks?
Yeah, and I just want to thank you, Tim, for your patience. My year has started off really jam-packed with a ton of things, and I can't be any more grateful considering just the landscape of life today. And It's just nice to feel that despite everything, I'm productive and I still have the means to serve in the capacity that I can. So, I just want to thank you for your patience in getting this coordinated, because I know that it probably would have been more ideal to maybe do it the week of that you messaged me, but I, again, appreciate your patience to get this together.
Oh, no, not at all. Actually, you did me a huge favor because it really helped out with the preparation, and it gave us a little bit of wiggle room. And hey, attitude, preparation, and effort. Those are the things I can control. So I had no problem being patient, and honestly, it's kind of like riding a roller coaster. Like, hey, now I'm at the top and I can't wait to kind of go on the rest of the ride. So although we met on a podcasting network and we don't really know each other that well, I feel like after listening to your podcast and getting to know a little bit of what you do, I feel closer, especially as a podcaster. There's a lot I think we have in common. But before we talk about that, I would really like a lot of my viewers, especially those who may be active duty military, inactive reserve, anyone who may be a veteran at the moment. I would like them to get to know you as a person. So I got a few questions for you, and I was hoping we can just explore those areas if that sounds like a plan.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure. So it looks like I did a little research, a little digging, and it looks like you went to San Diego State University. What can you tell our viewers? Because you hear all these things about San Diego, how it's beautiful, it's great, it's sunny. I've never heard a bad thing about San Diego. Can you tell us anything about that area that maybe the average tourist wouldn't know?
Yeah, it's funny because I now live in Virginia Beach, and I remember just leading up to the move, my friends would ask me, or actually my new friends out here when we came out here and I told them where I was from, they were like, why'd you leave paradise? They just jokingly say that. And there's a lot of good things to say about San Diego. For one, the weather is perfect. I will say that. I mean, it really does depend on where you live, but for the most part, being new to the East Coast for the last 3 years now, I didn't realize how I took for granted just my style of clothing back in San Diego. I didn't have to think too much about bringing a jacket with me when I left the house. I didn't have to think about staying warm, where I remember first moving out here when it first hit 16 degrees. And luckily my sister lives in New York City. So she told me before my first winter came, she was like, make sure you get a down coat. Make sure you get use this brand, get thermal jeans, get thermal everything. And I'm so glad I did, because this type of material like wool and cotton just would not do it. It wouldn't make the cut for just how intense the weather is out here. And I have never looked at the Weather Channel app so many times in my life until I moved out here. But in San Diego, I didn't have to do that. And and the thing is also, it's when it started to drizzle, you thought, oh, that's not a big deal. Here, when it drizzles, it rains and then it pours. And so I've learned to just be more aware of that. But San Diego's great. The downside of it, I would say, though, is now that I'm out here, I can say this just because I'm out here now, but, California in general, because the weather is pretty good over there, it is a little vain. It is about fashion. It's about, how you look. Everyone cares about, can you suck it in? You know what I mean? Everyone cares about their physique, how they appear on the surface, where out here, I haven't had to worry about that. I haven't felt self-conscious about gaining a couple pounds or just wearing loose clothing all the time. And so it is a little vain out there. And then the third thing, which I think is very important to talk about, is just the homelessness issue. All the major parks there, are just crowded, with homeless people who a lot of them are actually veterans, unfortunately, and since COVID has happened, there's been more and more homeless people, a lot of them by choice, because it turns out I would say this myself, if there's any place I would be homeless, it would be California, because weather's perfect. A lot of people are giving. A lot of people will just, go out and give you food left and right. So it's not a bad deal, and you have the public parks. If you have a tent, you're solid. You can do just fine. And so that's definitely, kind of the reality of perfect weather is you attract, I guess, more homelessness, because I remember when we moved out here, I was like, where's all the homeless people? I was just so used to that. We're out here, oh, maybe there's one, maybe there's two, but, if it's too cold, who's gonna be out? And of course they very much exist out here, but definitely not as prominent as San Diego and California as a whole. And then the last thing I will mention, Tim, I know I'm being very extensive about this, is one thing that I didn't have in San Diego that I have out here, just that hospitality. People here actually give me eye contact and actually say hello and wave at me and have a conversation with me, where back in San Diego, people wouldn't even look at you, because we were sort of conditioned, at least with my mom, of don't talk to strangers, don't talk to strangers, right? And so it just is a different culture overall. But yeah, I would say that for people that are just visiting, it's perfect. San Diego's perfect. It's beautiful. But if you live there, you start to see the cost of perfection. You really do. So
I'm sure. And I've come across a lot of people who are in the military, whether they be friends, some distant family members, or even customers when I used to work in retail. And you will hear so many different types of stories from different parts of the world. And I call myself a tourist in my own city. I don't really get to travel too much. So I always like to hear other people's experiences. And that was one of the driving forces behind me wanting to going to the military back in the day, of wanting to travel and see the world, because I was such a person that was kind of cooped up in his own city. And you talked about a few different areas in regards to San Diego. You talked about the culture and you talked about the climate, but you also talked about, the vanity and gaining weight. And I don't know about you, Jen, I've gained a little bit of weight since quarantine has started. And one thing I always am curious about when it comes to people, when it comes to different places, is the food. And I have a really fun question for you. The people in Philadelphia roll their eyes whenever they see the stereotypical shots of the Liberty Bell and the stereotypical shots of the big name cheesesteak places and the stereotypical shots of the pretzels and all this other stuff. And sometimes we feel like, hey, we're much more than that. You're showing the stuff, that touristy stuff. I want you to show the real stuff. Is there anything that comes to mind for you when it comes to San Diego that maybe people would see on TV and it's really not the real San Diego, that as a person from San Diego, you kind of roll your eyes at?
Wow, that's a good question, because, I haven't run into enough, I guess, people around here where they would say, oh yeah, I visited San Diego, this and this and this. I'm trying to imagine what people would say. I mean, I think the assumption of San Diego is that it's a beach town and that it's very slow paced and everything. It's just like a retirement community overall. But I sort of agree with the slow pace aspect if you compare it to LA, because a lot of people end up leaving LA to retire in San Diego, or they have a second home in San Diego or what have you. But, we're not just a retirement home. There's suburbia is a thing in San Diego too. I grew up a little more southern San Diego. I grew up in most of the school system there, at least when we ended up moving there, very much close to the Mexican border. And yeah, it's just regular families just trying to do right by their kids and, taking them through the school system to go to college, to get a good job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, there's a boring side of San Diego not boring, but yeah, there's a suburban side, I think is what I'm trying to say. It's not just a beach town. And then there's just a lot of different subcultures in San Diego. I feel like if you don't like one culture, if you want more of the city life, you have downtown San Diego. If you don't like the whole going to the clubs and being perfect all the time, there's places like North Park, South Park, Hillcrest, where it's more down to earth, or people call it hipster, hipster town, where it's a little more casual, laid back, wearing sneakers at a bar kind of thing, as opposed to nice shoes and heels or whatever. But yeah, it's interesting. I feel like there's a lot of different perceptions of San Diego, but I think that what people need to understand is that it's actually really eclectic. I think that's what people maybe don't know, that maybe they come there once, they look at the beaches and they think it's perfect and beautiful and very, like you said, touristy, but it is very eclectic, and you can find a lot of subcultures in San Diego. And it's huge. It's a huge city. It's not just, you don't think San Diego and think of it as an island of sorts with one culture. No, there's so many more little towns and cities in San Diego with different, like I said, different subcultures. So I think that's the key word, is it's a lot more eclectic than, let's say, the average tourist would think.
Wow, that was very insightful. I think that'll be really helpful for a lot of people who want to come, because there's so many. I remember going to San Antonio one time, and it was for work, so I couldn't really call it a vacation, but I remember going to San Antonio, and there was somebody he was a vendor rep, so he would travel all over the country, and he would say so many stereotypical things about Philly, because it's just, whenever he's watching sports, they show the stereotypical shot of the skyline, or they talk about the Schuylkill River and all these different things. And I'm like, oh man, there's so much more to the city. So I'm sure people from San Diego and the surrounding areas will appreciate that. There's one key thing that I think that you just said that can also apply to our topic today, and that's perception is reality. And I think a lot of people have this perception of military life. They have this perception of being a spouse to someone who has been in the military. And they even have a perception of what life is like after the military for so many different reasons. Some of them positive, some of them not so much. You once shared on when you were a guest on another person's podcast that you kind of had a general perception about military life, and your current marriage and meeting your husband kind of helped to change that, and your work with, your foundation kind of helped to change that. Can we talk about that a little bit on like what that switch was for you? And, based on your history, I would like to talk a little bit about that too. How your view went from one way and then something happened and now it is the way it is today.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. So I grew up, first and foremost, both my parents were immigrants from the Philippines. My dad was the one that joined the U.S. Navy before, I believe, the military bases were shut down in the Philippines when America took over and the Spaniards were, when the Philippines became an independent state from America, I believe that's when the American bases shut down. So my dad was, the last batch of people to join the military, the U.S. Navy. So I was born in Japan, in Yokosuka, Japan Naval Base. And yeah, it's actually kind of interesting because first and foremost, being of Filipino descent, being born in Japan, but on American soil, you can tell already that I was going to have a cultural, this cultural, what do you call it? How would I describe that? Just this culture shock and trying to juggle with different cultures and identities at a very young age. And then on top of that, we moved around every 2 to 3 years. The interesting thing is, the first base that I at least was a part of, the one that I was born at, turned out to be my dad's last military base and the last place he was stationed at before he was 2 years away from retiring. So he had already served 18 years at this point, and he was going to finish his service there in Japan. Well, unfortunately, this was back in 1998. My dad's last ship, which is the USS Kitty Hawk, was going from Japan to South Korea when he went missing. And they actually sent a search crew for 3 days, and they continued the investigation for 3 months after that until they just kind of let it go and they were able to not find any more evidence. But by the time they gave up on that, my family and I had already catapulted our lives back to being civilians. We went back to San Diego because my mom has family there and also my dad's brother was there. So it just made sense to go back there. And it was interesting. Once we returned back to civilian life, and I was 10 at the time, it was as if we completely forgot about dad. It's like he didn't exist anymore because mom was just so focused on raising these 3 kids under 11 years old. So, fast forward to, 20 plus years later, when I met my husband, who is a West Point grad, and his class graduated when 9/11 happened. So he was one of the first of many soldiers to go to Iraq. And when he came back, he transitioned out. But even though he transitioned back into civilian life, he got into financial services and specialized in the military community. And so it was interesting meeting him. He ended up leaving Germany to come to San Diego. And that's actually how we met, was he was in town. And he was, at the time I had a social media marketing agency and he was looking for a social media manager. And so we were introduced to each other, and I promise I don't do this to all of my clients, but yeah, we ended up hitting it off, and here we are today, 5 years later, being together and in business. But the interesting thing is when I met him, I had actually assumed that people only join the military for employment opportunities. I thought, oh, you're looking for a better life. You're looking, for a chance to travel to get out of your certain situation, and then of course, after losing my dad, I saw it as a death trap. I thought any job in general that kind of promised long-term stability, benefits, etc., I saw that as a death trap because I thought, if I'm in anything stable, I'm going to die like my dad. It was just this thing that stuck in me mentally. But when I met my husband, who very much is service-driven and mission-oriented, he actually showed me a different side of the military, which was to serve. I mean, at West Point, they taught him duty, honor, country. So even after his service, and a lot of his classmates, even after they transition out of the military, still serving, working C-suite positions, business owners, just doing a lot of incredible things, running for politics. Like, he has all those types of friends. And I was all like, I don't have types of friends like that. But what it did is it kind of sparked that, I guess, desire to do something greater than myself. And part of wanting to do that first and foremost was to work past or unpack really the trauma that I had experienced in losing my dad. So there's just a lot of things, in the 20 years after losing my dad that I really had to work through. But I guess you can say in regards to the transformation, I personally went from like, no, the military is bad, it takes away the people you love, to, oh, the military has taught me to be, service-oriented, mission-oriented, and to, focus on things that are greater than me, because what else are we going to do on this earth? Like, we're all about serving each other, and it just gives me more purpose in life, and makes me feel more fulfilled and just satisfied with what I'm doing today. Like, I'm not just running a business to make money. I'm running a business to serve, So there's a lot in there, but I hope that made sense.
No, sure. I think that's huge. So first and foremost, thank you for sharing that. I'm sure being a podcaster and sometimes guest, it's a story you go through many times, but I think that's huge for you to be able to draw from those emotions that you experienced 20 years ago and do a lot of self-reflection. And that's phenomenal. I think for people to hear that, like, hey, you can think one way about something and have something in your life completely shake the foundation of that belief system. And sometimes it's for the better. I think that's awesome. Another thing that I think is shaking up the foundation for a lot of different things is your podcast. It is an award-winning podcast, and it is military-centric. But more specifically, what I like about it is it gives people the necessary knowledge and tools in order to succeed. So specifically when it comes to current and post-military life. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to create the Holding Down the Fort podcast and what it was like to get these guests onto your show to talk about these different areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So this actually started, the idea came about amongst my colleagues in the business I run with my husband, U.S. Vet Wealth. And the way that I like to describe it is we provide thought-provoking financial education and flexible financial solutions for our career military families. And the thing is, when it comes to financial decisions in a household, you can talk to the service member all day, but at the end of the day, it's the spouse that holds down the fort and says, yeah, we can go with that, or no, like, I don't like that financial decision. And, my team mainly consisted of veterans. And so naturally they would attract other veterans and talk about their finances. But very often we would come across, like, let's say that a veteran is ready to move forward and then finally includes their spouse into the conversation. They're like, wait, what? Like, you didn't tell me. You didn't
right.
tell me. I don't want to do this. And so it's usually at that end when there's this miscommunication. And of course the spouse, who probably already just feels like their life is a constant treasure hunt and it's constantly changing and shifting, to hear that their service member made a decision without them, it's kind of insulting,
Right.
So with my background, having been a military family, like a career military family, I felt like it was best for me to build that relationship with these families. And also because I think to many civilians, when you think about soldiers, you don't really think of them as human. You just think like, oh, they're here to serve, they're here to protect. Mm-hmm. But you don't think about the family that they come home to. You don't think about, like, if you lose a soldier, you don't just lose a soldier, you lose the family spirit, their drive, like the effects of losing a soldier is like, it's not just a soldier that's lost for the nation, but for a family, and the ripple effects that can cause, which I can, talk about at a very intimate level, because, when we lost dad, it's like our life is catapulted back to civilian life. We didn't have a lot of support. My mom just focused on, fortunately we had family that she could depend on, but it took me like 20 plus years to have a podcast like this where I'm finally learning what resources are even available for me as a Gold Star daughter that I didn't know a long time ago because I just wasn't informed. And so in addition to building a relationship with the career military families of today, for the sake of our business, but really for just to understand who they are and what their needs are, not us assuming like, hey, you need financial planning. What we come to find is that it's hard for them to make these decisions because they're distracted with a million other things, So we have to be sensitive to that and not just, talk about money like right away. Also, we realize that because they have so many distractions or they have so many things to balance, we realize we need to put together a show where we do bring on movers and shakers of the community and for the community to let them know that they exist and they're here to help. Because the government can only do so much. Everyone has their thoughts on the government, but for the most part, they can't do it all. No one can do it all, even the government.
Right.
And that's not a political statement. That's just fact in life. No one can do everything. And
Sure.
so the whole idea is that to have a show where, sometimes it's easier to open up to someone who's been through a similar experience as you than to open up to a therapist. And that's really the approach that I take on the show is I want to bring people who are in the community or for the community that do have knowledge, resources, or, relevant stories that these career military families can, eat up and more importantly feel like, oh, okay, no matter where I go, no matter where I move to next, holding down the fort feels like home to me. It feels like a place that I can go to consistently and know that whoever's on the show, I can contact them right now if I wanted to because they want to be contacted. They want people to reach out to them, And a lot of times military spouses, how they collect their resources and tools and what have you is through word of mouth. And so they, chat with one another and they say, hey, what do you recommend? What do you recommend? And so this show very much serves as that extra, word of mouth platform in case they move to a new place and they don't know who to talk to, but at least they know that they have this community of people who've been on my show that they can reach out and, connect with. So that's a little bit about that. And in regards to how we find people, initially it started with me personally, going on Instagram and using hashtags military spouse, MILSO, MILSPO, and finding all of these military spouses who are very, let's say, narrative and expressive about their story and their journey and their struggle. And I asked them to be on the show. And then here we are in the 4th season. We don't have to really do much outreach anymore because people find us and they apply to be on our show. So, and on top of that, I even met my co-host and she's always like, hey, what about this person? What about that person? And so initially it was hard to, it wasn't hard, but I had to put in a lot of effort to do the outreach. And now it's just so great to have a pending list of people who are waiting to hear back from me and be chosen. Someone mentioned to me, a past guest said, thank you for choosing me to be on your show. And it's just nice to make them feel honored, I guess, to be on the show. But that's really what it's become today is sort of this waiting list of people that we need to, qualify to bring on. And of course, share whatever they want to share to continue to help our families today.
Wow, that's beautiful, Jen. There's so much there to unpack that that really speaks to me, not only as a podcaster, but as a person. And I'm going to touch on the personal piece first. One of the things that I love is music. I love music. I love the way music makes me feel. I love the way the music makes me think. And I love how vulnerable I feel when I listen to certain songs and how happy or how angry I feel when I listen to certain songs. And I think your podcast is synonymous to music in the sense that people can hear it and they can have these emotions kind of validated in a way when they listen to your podcast. So I think it's really cool to have a podcast called Holding Down the Fort because essentially you want to relate to that. Take occupation out of it, take, where you're at currently in your life out of it, and you just want to be validated on how you're feeling. And I think when you listen to Holding Down the Fort, you feel that way. I think that's dope that you are taking so many different things from home ownership or travel or so many different things and people who've been in those boots, literally, not figuratively, been in those boots or been in those core frames, and you're having them on the show, and somebody on the other side of that speaker is listening and relating and learning. You can't produce that. That's a genuine feeling, and I think that's super dope. Now, as a podcaster, I really like the name because as simple as it is, you and I both know that coming up with a name for something is the hardest thing in the world. It is super hard. You have social groups, you ask 50 people, you have 50 different names, and in my case, you may even record a few episodes with the older name, and you're like, you know what, I don't like how that sounds, and you go over it over and over and over again, and I think holding down the fort, I don't know how long it took you to get there, but it's so important because you hold down the fort by having a fort, a virtual fort, of people coming to you to gain knowledge and stability and to create a foundation. You also hold down the fort in the sense that you want to keep this idea going and you want to touch so many people and you impact so many people's lives. I think that's awesome. I think it's amazing. And I think the name is very, very appropriate. Now, certain forts are stationary. I think your fort is very versatile. It's very mobile. And that can be a theme when it comes to military life and being a military spouse or being a veteran spouse is you're very mobile. You're all over the place. You're traveling nonstop. You get the next PCS and you're like, oh man, I got to go here. I was just getting used to the school district, or I was just getting used to this hoagie shop or this sandwich shop. And now I got to move, you know. Those are things that can really blindside people.
Thank you for complimenting my title to my show, Holding Down the Fort. I do want to say that I didn't come up with the name. One of my colleagues did. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, a little background in case anyone's curious. So I was talking amongst my colleagues, and I remember we were on this conference call, and I was like, you know, like it has to be a title about like how military spouses are just like killing it, you know, like how they just balance all these things and create a stable home for the service member to come back to. And so shout out to one of my colleagues, Ethan. He said, holding down the fort. And
just like that.
Yeah, and he's a genius. Like, if you met him, he's a crazy genius, like crazy genius AF. I'm not gonna cuss, but if anyone knows what AF means, like, yeah, he's crazy in the best way possible. And as soon as we knew that, as soon as he said that, we were like, okay, we got to run with it. Like, that's a pretty awesome title. We got, you know, a graphic designer to put together and everything. And I hear you, like when it comes to coming up with names, like one of my other podcast shows, it took me forever to come up with that name, but I think it helps, you know, they say like two heads are better than one, right? And so I'm so glad that I had my colleagues to talk about that. It's like I knew that the need was there, but I didn't know how to name it, and he totally did that. So that's like shout out to Ethan for, you know, that name. So
hey, good job, Ethan.
Yeah, good job, Ethan. Shout out to you.
So one thing that I think your company does really well with the U.S. Vet Wealth is you give people a virtual space to turn to. Not only do you do that with the podcast, but you do that with your website. Can you talk a little bit about your website and what people should expect to find on it?
With our company, U.S. Vet Wealth, again, it's not for everyone. Let me start with that. We are not your typical financial firm where we're going to talk to you about retirement and how to save for retirement and, you know, wait till you're in your 60s to pull money out of your account because anytime before then you're going to get a penalty. You're going to have to pay a penalty. We don't take that approach because when it comes to military families, when they retire, they're still pretty young. Like they're in their either late 30s, young 40s. They still have another, 10, 20 years of working age before they retire. And so we do something very unique. Like we believe that, our military families, our career military families truly deserve a sense of freedom and autonomy in their post-military life. They deserve it. They sacrifice a lot. However, a lot of financial education is tailored towards civilians and kind of like the civilian who has, climbed corporate America and, saves for retirement or what have you. Or of course, like the wealthier families who, have different, like they just deal with their money differently. And so we specialize in career military families because they're not jumping from one corporate job to another. They're transitioning from one completely like unique, crazy lifestyle back to civilian life. And so it's not just a financial transition. It's an emotional transition. It's a psychological transition. It's there's so much to that transition to post-military life that the regular, civilian financial advisor just cannot help with, or they just don't understand that. Very often, a lot of, let's say realtors will say, oh, we'll help you with your VA loan. Let's help you get your first house and stuff like that. And like, that's great and all, but like, it's more than that. It's more than just being a homeowner. It's like, where do I want to be a homeowner so that I can live my new purpose in post-military life, so I can actually, re-explore who I want to be, maybe pursue the career that I really wanted to pursue before I joined the military, that passion that I had, a long time ago. And so when you go on our website, because we do talk about, a lot of like what I call thought-provoking financial education, we provide a ton of free education on everything our career military families need to know about, let's say their survivor benefit plan, their thrift savings plan, just their military benefits in general. We show them that because, the phrase we use is you served for it, you earned it. Like you earned the right to achieve some level of financial flexibility in your post-military life, to not just jump into another job and not just, try to replace that military paycheck, but to maybe travel for a while, maybe start a business, maybe take it easy, maybe intern somewhere, explore apprenticeship. We just want to encourage our military families, the service members and of course the spouses, as a whole to kind of rediscover who they want to be now that they're not being told to follow orders. And so our website provides a ton of articles, blogs. We have a number of books. One of our favorite books that we're pushing for right now is called Veteran Wealth Secrets, which anyone can actually visit veteranwealthsecrets.com today to download the first 3 chapters, not 1, not 2, but 3, because we think that, what we're putting out there is very unique and most of all, most needed and deserving for, our military families. But yeah, it's very tailored to them. We also have more stuff on there, such as access to our YouTube channel, information about my podcast show, Holding Down the Fort. My husband is also starting a show called Veteran Wealth Secrets, the same name as his book, to interview veteran business owners and also kind of serve as a talk show for us to talk more about our philosophies. But the greatest takeaway that, to sum up the website, what you'll find is just a ton of education and resources for these military families who are transitioning out or even about to or still pretty seasoned, still serving active duty, let's say they're 10 plus years in and they're looking for a way to maybe reinvest their money while they're in service, because there's definitely a lot of active duty service members who, get into real estate or other types of, side hustles while they're in service, which is pretty astounding when they do that, because it's they already are bombarded with so much work, I think.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, overall, just a ton of value. That's really what we're trying to push for, because we know that what we teach is not talked about enough, and therefore, it is very easy for a service member and a military family to kind of look at it with skepticism. And quite honestly, we welcome it. We want you to be skeptical. We know you're going to be skeptical. So really, really look at our education, our articles and all that stuff, and really see that what you have is good, but what you could have in learning through us could be greater. That's really what we're saying, is you could do just fine with what you already have. But if you're looking for more options that actually might be greater for you, our website is that place for you.
Wow, I think that's so cool. Got caught there. Well, Jen, I think it's been a wonderful conversation. I think it's been huge, too, for people to have an extra outlet to go and learn. I think one of the best things anybody can do is learn, especially when it's given away in some cases for free or at very little expense. I think we do so many things to learn about the things we're passionate about. Why not be passionate about our financial security? So I think that's really, really great, something that you're offering. Well, Jen, thank you so much. This has been a huge opportunity, not only for me, but I'm sure for many of our listeners. And I'm sure I can't wait to hear more of your episodes, and hopefully I can have you back on the show in the future.
Yeah. Hey, I'm all about helping and giving and educating. And so if I can give back and be back on to help your listeners, I'm for it.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim.